Amol Sinha, welcome to ITV Gold. I hope you're doing well.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope you're well too.
Of course, you are the Executive Director of ACLU New Jersey. I think it's really important to have you here with us on ITV Gold to discuss very pertinent issues that are impacting the nation right now. But just starting off this interview, I have to ask you, for the audience that may not be aware about ACLU and its amazing work, could you give us a little insight into what the ACLU is and what kind of programs and work are you currently doing during this pandemic?
Sure, thank you. So the ACLU has been around for 100 years. It's the American Civil Liberties Union. And our goal is to defend and promote constitutional rights for all Americans. And what that means is that we're looking out for people's First Amendment right to free speech, their right to practice their religion, their right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government so that the police can't just take your property or arrest you without reason, and their right to be equally protected under the law, regardless of your identity, whether you're a racial minority or a religious minority or an LGBTQ person. We want to make sure that people are protected and that their constitutional rights are respected. And we do that in multiple ways. We are a litigation organization, so we're in court every single day, filing lawsuits on behalf of people whose constitutional rights have been infringed upon. We're in the legislature talking to lawmakers about how to pass legislation to promote constitutional rights and fight back against legislation that may infringe on constitutional rights. And we're in community spaces. We're talking to people, youth, folks in public settings about their rights, what to do to promote their rights, and how to participate in democracy in a meaningful way through a constitutional rights perspective.
Definitely. We are talking about the immigrant community, the minority community here.
Yeah.
Right now, while we're in the pandemic, racial disparity has been a topic that's been openly discussed in various spectrum of the government, in various sectors here as well. What is your comment on the rights of the immigrants right now? Are they under a threat? Are they being compromised? What has the ACLU seen in the last couple of months with this pandemic?
Well, let me start with how we are addressing this pandemic wholesale, right? So first of all, early on, we knew that, in March, we knew when the pandemic was going to hit the United States sincerely, that this was going to be a racial justice issue.
Yeah.
And that was clear because we knew that every institution in the United States is rife with systemic racism. And so a pandemic that's going to impact every institution is going to exacerbate the fissures that already exist. And so when and the data has borne it out. So when we see the health outcomes, right, immigrant community members and Black and Brown community members are dying and being infected at higher rates than white folks in New Jersey and in the country. In education, Black and Brown communities and immigrant community members and children are less likely to have the digital resources that they need in order to properly educate themselves. We see it in the economics of it, right? Like we're seeing Black and Brown owned businesses shutter at higher rates compared to white owned businesses. And of course, we see it in the criminal justice system where we already have a racial disparity. And the prisons are some of the biggest clusters of COVID infection in our country. And so we knew that this was going to exacerbate racial inequities across the country, and it's certainly proven to be true. And what we needed to do was figure out, how we're going to help those who are most vulnerable. And one of the populations that we've been focused on are people who are incarcerated, and another population is immigrant community members. So first, on the incarcerated front, we knew that the pandemic was going to hit prisons really hard, which it did. And in New Jersey, we know that we have the highest rate of COVID-related death in the country in its prisons. After talking to public health experts and criminal justice experts, what we learned was that the best way to address this issue is to release people. And that means releasing significant numbers of people from prison so that the people who are released can properly self-isolate, and the people who remain in prison can properly socially distance. And what we know about prisons is that they weren't designed with social distancing in mind. They were designed to warehouse people. And so we created what we think is a very elegant approach where we would offer credits to people who are incarcerated during this pandemic. And those credits would be, would be permitted for people who are going to be released in the next year. And our theory is that if people are going to be released anyways in the next several months, why should we allow them to languish in prison so that they could be further exposed to the virus and then bring that virus back into communities where they may live after they are out of custody? And I think, it makes no public health sense and no public safety sense to keep people incarcerated in this time if they're going to be out anyways in the next few months. And so, we're hoping for that legislation to pass through the Assembly this month and for it to take effect soon thereafter.
How much of the incarcerated population is community of color? How much do you see the African American community in it?
It's disproportionately represented. So in New Jersey, we have the worst racial disparities in our prisons in the country. So you're 12 times more likely to be incarcerated if you're Black than if you're white. Wow. And so a significant percentage of the prison population is Black. And there's a big number of Hispanic and Latinx people as well. And it's so this makes, the COVID response and the spread of COVID inside prisons a clear racial justice issue.
This brings me to our ongoing conversation about systemic racism. Last time also when we had you here on ITV Gold, we discussed it with the sad case and the death of George Floyd. Unfortunately, I have you here discussing another case here, Jacob Blake, who was shot 7 times by the police. My question to you is, what has been the ACLU stand on it? And, to further discuss this, what do we truly need to educate law enforcement so that in, vulnerable lives, people that have not done anything, they are not impacted? What should we do?
So the situation with Jacob Blake is, of course, tragic, and what we need to do is, we can't limit ourselves to educating police. We can't limit ourselves to thinking about training and bias trainings and things like that. Those are things that we've been talking about for decades with police, and a lot of police departments have implemented them, and things still haven't changed. The easy way is to, just say that we're going to, have another training or do another lesson for police, and allow the same injustices to perpetuate. What we need to do in this moment is to have a real critical conversation about the role of police in American society, whether they are actually adding to public safety or whether they are harming public safety. We're seeing more and more, and it's because of social media and because of the proliferation of cell phone cameras that we're seeing more of these incidents. Perhaps it's always been the case that police have had carte blanche to cause violence in communities and escalate situations. There are a lot of circumstances in which in which something goes wrong during the police encounter. Where the police presence actually escalates the situation. There was an instance here in New Jersey where a young man was emotionally disturbed. He was in the back of a police car. He ended up fighting with the police officer, and the police officer shot and killed him. Now, people that saw that video will say, yeah, he shouldn't fight with a police officer. But my question is, when we know that there's an emotionally disturbed person on the parkway and on the Garden State Parkway, which there was here, and he's there because his car has been disabled, what he needs is a counselor and a tow truck. He doesn't need an armed police officer to come there, which is just going to escalate the situation and allow for this tragedy to arise. And so we need to figure out what our first responses are, and whether it makes sense to send armed people into it. Frankly, we're asking police departments to do too much. We're asking them to be, of course, law enforcement officers, but we're also asking them to be counselors. We're asking them to be therapists. We're asking them to be, child therapists and child counselors, victims' rights people. And I don't know if they are trained to do all of that. And there are, in fact, people in society that are. And so I think it makes sense for us to think about whether or not we should pull away from police a little bit and invest in life-affirming resources like social services and other sorts of things that will actually help people and potentially save lives. And so that's, the ACLU sort of big picture response. But, when these incidents happen, we need more information. We know for a fact that there's insufficient police oversight. We can't always rely on internal affairs to do the right thing. We know that policing themselves presents an actual conflict. We need civilian oversight of police through civilian complaint review boards. We have little transparency here in New Jersey and in most of the country. We have no idea, even when the most egregious misconduct happens, who's doing the misconduct and what remedies resulted from it. And thirdly, we need to stop protecting bad cops. We have a lot of instances where even the worst actors amongst the police, if you buy into this mentality of there are bad apples among police forces and those are the problematic actors, well, police unions and police departments wholesale defend those bad cops over and over and over again. And we result in avoiding accountability. They're not held liable from a criminal perspective or a civil perspective. And we need to stop that. And that means, ending the concept of qualified immunity, which protects police officers from civil liability. And we need to, question whether police unions, which serve to protect those bad cops and don't represent the diversity of New Jersey or of any other society, and oftentimes have conflict with any lawmaker or any official who's trying to promote transparency and accountability, whether police unions are actually doing good for society or whether they're just causing more harms and perpetuating the same injustices that we're seeing happening across the country daily. And so, I think these are some concrete steps that we can take, the civilian oversight, the police transparency, ending qualified immunity, and questioning the motives of police departments and police unions who so often go unchecked.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of that, I have to ask you to just be a little bit more clear. Do you support or do you have any comments on defunding of the police? Again, we have talked about it. We've heard so much on it. There are various aspects to how you can, go about it. Some people are asking for community policing instead of other kinds. How do you look at it?
So what we know is that the status quo isn't working, right? We see in New Jersey and elsewhere that oftentimes municipalities give blank checks to police departments. There are oftentimes, I was talking to a friend of mine who said to me, who works in politics in New Jersey, who said to me that, it's extremely difficult to take a dollar away from policing. And what that means is that if there's an intention to create a new program or a new social service or a new department, they will cut budgets from any other department except for police. And we have to question that. I think now is a time in which we are able to see whether or not policing is working. And there's a sustained conversation across the country about scrutinizing police budgets. So like any other budget that we have in the United States and at the local level, we should be scrutinizing those police budgets. We should make sure that every dollar is accounted for, and questioning whether we're spending it in the right direction to make sure that people live their best lives and to make sure that people are safe. And from what we're seeing, right, the fact that police departments are growing and spending more money, and there's militarization of police throughout the United States. They have tanks in local municipalities and riot gear in small towns. whether or not we need that, right? And I don't know if we do. And perhaps we need to invest in different directions, like social services, like psychologists and counselors and drug treatment and other sorts of providers, and education, instead of policing. And I think that's an appropriate conversation to have.
And I think that's a really interesting point that you brought. I think it gives a bigger perspective of why everyone is questioning this. You know, it's very clear that the ACLU and you are supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, which is demanding for racial justice, for equity, and for so much more. What is your stand on just the movement itself? And when you're looking at the South Asian population, since those are our viewers, what do you think we should all be doing right now in order to do some more anti-racist work?
That's a good question. First of all, I think the Black Lives Matter movement is very important, right? We are seeing finally some attention towards the historic devaluing of Black life in the United States. And that is because Black people in the United States have faced a particular harm, different from other people of color, certainly different from white people in the United States. And their history, is rife with oppression, and it's been injustice upon injustice for Black community members. And every institution in the United States, including the criminal legal system, the educational institution, housing in the United States, corporate life in America, corporate America, and the economy wholesale. These institutions have been rife with anti-Black racism for a long time. And in fact, it wasn't that long ago where it was perfectly legal, right, to discriminate against Black people in housing, right? And it wasn't that long ago that it was perfectly legal to deny jobs to people because of their race. And so I think we need to grapple with what it means to be Black in the United States right now and how we can create a more just society. I think too often people in power think that giving a little bit towards equality results in inequality for white folks or those who are in power. That's not the case. What we're trying to do is create a level playing field when things have been so unequal for so long. And I think there's a lot to do here. I think there's a reason why the net worth of Black families is a fraction of what it is for white families, and it's not because of individual accountability. It's because opportunities don't exist. And it's because of historic discrimination that has led to the oppression of a certain group of people in the United States.
Then how important does their voice become during this election year? We are just 2 months away from the elections. How important then does that become as a conversation for all of us?
Extremely important. I think, we need to think about, as we elect people at every level, we need to think about what they're going to do for racism in the United States. What is it that our president, our local leaders are going to do to address racial injustice at every level? So it's extremely important that when we go to vote, or vote by mail, we think about racial justice and how our leaders are either going to resolve racial justice issues or exacerbate racial justice issues. And I think there's a lot of extremism in our politics right now, where there are people that are in power that are enabling the worst instincts in American society, right? There are people in power who are enabling white supremacy. And enabling those divisions using coded or not so coded language about the suburbs or about urban communities, and talking about specific lawmakers as causing harm. I think that's really harmful, and it's about time that when we go to vote this year, we're thinking about communities beyond our own. And so for South Asians, I think it's really important for us to think about what it means to be not just a person of color, but what it might mean to be a Black person in the United States right now. And I know that there's been a history of colorism and anti-Black racism in South Asian American communities as well. and we need to grapple with that because it's really a moment right now that we need to take advantage of and think about how we as a society are either perpetuating racism or doing more to create a more unified world. And I don't think, I think, the younger generation, kids and millennials right now are more in tune with racial justice. They're less tolerant of racist views. And I'm optimistic about what the future holds for our community, for South Asian communities, and for the United States, because I do think that we are going to a more hopeful and more optimistic and a more unified place in the future.
Let me ask you this. What is your personal take, and if you would like to give us the ACLU take as well, would be great, on this administration, on how it has handled COVID-19, on how it's handling this whole race war that's happening in the nation, on how it's handling elections itself. What is your take, and is the ACLU endorsing a candidate?
So I'll start there. The ACLU is not endorsing a candidate. We are a nonpartisan organization. But look, we hold government accountable. And this president has been a constitutional crisis from day one. When Donald Trump was elected, we said, we'll see you in court, in a tweet. And that's because he had proposed from the Muslim ban to all of the immigration policies of family separation and talking about criminal justice and advancing the death penalty. Those were things that we knew that we would have to sue about. And sure enough, we have filed hundreds of lawsuits, more so than any other presidential administration in our history. In our 100-year history as ACLU, we filed hundreds of lawsuits against the Trump administration, and we're counting. We're still going, and we're filing more. So I think this administration has perpetuated white supremacy. I think this administration has enabled the worst in American society, and it has sowed division relentlessly. And so, I say we're committed to holding government accountable, and we do so in every administration, whether they're Democrats or Republican, and we sued every president multiple times. But there's something particularly harmful about this moment in American society that we haven't seen before. There's just a dose of chaos that's inserted into every institution, whether we're talking about the immigration system or the criminal justice system, and we need to do something about it. And we're committed to suing, using our legislature, and using community organizing and making sure that our voices are heard every step of the way. So that's both my take and the ACLU's take on this work.
What is your focus and things that you want to really address up until the elections? These next 2 months are going to be very important in getting voices out and getting people to vote. What are you focused on?
So here in New Jersey, there are a couple of things. First of all, directly related to the election is that New Jersey, like many other states, is going to a predominantly vote by mail election. And while that's in some ways a good thing, because we know that all registered voters in New Jersey are supposed to receive a vote by mail ballot, so more people will have ballot in hand. We also know that there's a greater chance of disenfranchisement as a result of vote by mail, because there are a lot of technical aspects to voting and logistical aspects. Because first of all, you need to know where to sign. You need to seal the envelopes. So you need to get them in time. And of course, we know that the Trump administration has been undermining the Postal Service and vote by mail states. And in fact, the Trump administration has sued New Jersey for going to a predominantly vote by mail election. And so I think there's going to be a lot of misinformation out there about vote by mail, and we need to make sure that people have the right information and know how to do that, and make sure that their vote is counted, no matter who it is that they're voting for or what it is that they're voting for. Right. Secondly, in this election in New Jersey, voters have the chance to vote on a ballot initiative to legalize cannabis, marijuana in our state. That's really important because we've been involved in promoting legalization for cannabis for many years at the ACLU, and in fact, in the last 6 years, we've really amped up our work around legalization. And for us, it's because this is a racial justice issue. In New Jersey, we're making about 36,000 arrests for marijuana possession. And predominantly, those are of Black and brown New Jerseyans. In New Jersey, you're 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana if you're Black than if you're white. And these arrests have lifelong consequences, right? People are missing out on economic opportunities. They're being kicked out of school. They're being denied student loans. They are being kicked out of their housing if they're in public housing. They're losing custody of their children or being prohibited from adopting children. And those are really serious outcomes for something that most people believe should be legal. So we're leading a campaign to legalize marijuana, to make sure that people vote yes in November, and to do it for the right reasons of racial justice. And people can learn more about our campaign by going to njcan2020.org, where they can find out, what our principles are, who's in our coalition, what racial justice statistics there are about marijuana, and how to vote yes, and how to sign up to learn more.
Right. If I was to ask you what kind of support or help does the ACLU New Jersey need, what would you say?
First of all, we need all the support we can get in terms of just activism, making sure that people are engaged with us either through social media or other means, and second of all, it's through financial support. The ACLU is a nonprofit organization. We have been in operation across the country for 100 years and in operation in New Jersey for 60 years. And we do it entirely through donations. Oh, wow. We don't take a single cent from our government. We sue the government, so we choose not to take their money. We are relying on individual donors and some foundations for all of our work. And we do a lot. We have, in New Jersey, an active legal docket with more than, I want to say about 70 cases active right now at any given time. We have a policy docket of dozens of pieces of legislation that we're writing and promoting, and we are in community spaces every single day talking to people about their rights. And in this time when, there is it's been the notion of who deserves rights has been so politicized in the United States, and there are people in power that think that there are certain people that are less deserving of rights. I think the work of the ACLU is more relevant than ever, and I hope that anybody listening will support us as we work to defend those constitutional rights that we once took for granted. These are things that we've litigated before that we thought were secure, like, being free from racism in our daily life, like making sure that people are treated equally regardless of their sexual orientation. But these are things that are still active fights, and we know that no fight for civil liberties stays won, that we need to continue to be vigilant, because there are people who want to take civil rights and liberties away from us. So I hope that listeners and viewers will take a look at the ACLU's website and give where they can, and make sure that they're thinking about us and working with us in their activism.
I just have one last question left for you, Amol. If somebody's watching the show right now and they are confused about if their rights have been violated as an immigrant or a minority community, what should they do in that case? And also, when should they approach the ACLU if that is happening to them?
So first of all, they should approach the ACLU at any time. We have an office in every state. We have 54 affiliates of the ACLU across the country, and plus our national office. And every state's chapter has a a website that links to where they can go to file a complaint. But if people are having their constitutional rights violated or feel like they've been violated in some way, they should, of course, file a complaint with the ACLU. Look to other legal resources. Their states, if they are in a state like New Jersey, may have an Office of Civil Rights where they can go and learn more. Sometimes, like in New Jersey, they are actually very good and have good laws against discrimination. But generally speaking, there are very few nationwide civil rights organizations like the ACLU, and I would encourage people to come to us. We have the ability to build litigation. We have the ability to fight for people's rights in a unique way, and I hope that if folks feel like their constitutional rights are violated, they contact their ACLU, and if we can't help, we'll say that, and we'll refer you to somebody else, or figure out a way in which we can be of assistance in the future, because it's important that all rights are preserved, and that people feel safe and as though they are being treated equally.
Yeah, feeling safe and being treated equally, just a little bit to ask, but very difficult to get for certain communities. Thank you so much for your time here on ITV Gold, Amol. I hope you have a good one.
Thank you so much. Take care.